just a few Bible readings, a few from here and there, and all over the place. But hopefully you'll see why we're not just concentrating on one passage. But I thought we would look this evening at the word regret and the theme of regret, and why I think that's important. I remember doing a series around these words like regret and guilt and self-image and things like that, because those are all things that compete with the kingship of Jesus in your life. And sometimes regret actually competes with the kingship of Jesus, with the kingdom of God. And sometimes you can not even realize it, but you're living your life because you're trying to set in order a regretful past. And some people really struggle, and maybe it's not you yourself, but you know someone who just simply struggles with regret. And maybe you can just have therefore an approach, or think about it, or I'm not saying this will be the definition of how to approach it, the only way to approach it, but some of the themes I think you need to keep in mind as you look at something like regret. So our first Bible reading is Genesis 6. Genesis 6, and it's verse 5 to verse 7. It's on page 6 in our Bibles here. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. And then turn over to the book of Joel. Joel, it's in this Bible here, it's on page 921. 921. It's Joel chapter 2. And it's just verse 25 to 27. I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, my great army which I sent among you. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never again be put to shame. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and there is none else. My people shall never again be put to shame. And then 1 Corinthians chapter 15. You can just listen to these if you don't want to turn to them, but 1 Corinthians 15, and then we'll be going to 2 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians 15. Paul is here speaking about the people who witnessed the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we just pick this up in verse 8. The way he describes himself, that's what we're looking at in these few verses. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace towards me was not in vain. We're just end the reading there. But we'll turn over then to 2 Corinthians chapter 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and it's verse 1 to verse 6. I, Paul, myself entreat you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold towards you when I am away. I beg of you that when I am present I may not have to show boldness, which with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. Amen. Now, we give some of these out. Let's pass those back. So just as I'm introducing this, I'm also going to use a form of argument tonight 3 times. If you pick up on it, I'll probably use it 3 times, where we can't break into the exact context of the verses that we'll be quoting and know everything about them or exhaustively deal with them. But we'll see, or I'll argue 2 or 3 times at least, that Paul brings a general argument to deal with a particular problem. And so we don't need to concentrate necessarily on the particular problem, but we are thinking about the general argument that he uses. So I'll give you an example of this. So a child falls and hurts their knee, and the parent, out of that experience, just simply tells them, I love you, I will love you always. Some particular problem has brought about a very general statement, not just in relation to the knee or caring for the person who's hurt their knee, but a very general statement. And that's what happens sometimes in the Bible, especially in Paul, where a general principle or something huge he brings to bear on something particular. So I want to warn you of that we're not going into the context of the particular problems each time, but we're justifying that we're just simply focusing on the general argument. So if you look at the introduction here, we'll keep pretty close to these notes. And regret is something that we all experience to some degree. Did any of you ever miss the specials and littles, and by the time you've turned up, they're all away? Anybody do that? No, well, I have. And I've missed something that I really want, and then you have to wait until the next time it comes in. And maybe you miss a TV program, and you just really want to see it, and you don't know if you'll ever see it again. But they're not really serious things. Sure, they're not. They're not really serious things at all. And yet we know what regret is. We're going to work up to sort of a definition here. But I just want you to remember we've all experienced it to some degree. But many people can really have serious regrets. Wrong choices in life. People can sometimes take years to come to terms with wrong choices. Many can regret the career they've chosen. And so every morning on the bus as they're going to the dreaded job, they're saying, why didn't I do something else in life. And they're really resentful nearly because they just have to keep going. Why couldn't I have been something else? They're perhaps full of regret that way. Even more sadly, some people regret the people they marry. And some people, their regrets get bigger and bigger, and they say, I'm sorry I married this person. And instead of focusing on covenant commitment, promises, they just focus on, no, I could have done something else, and I could have been with someone else, and they have regrets. Some people battle with regret when their actions have caused serious injury or death to another person. That is a really important one. You will come across people in your experience, I don't know all of your backgrounds, but it can happen to any of us, where a mistake we make, or even perhaps even our selfishness, results in someone else being seriously injured, or perhaps even losing their life. And so it's really important that regret is huge, and it can, for little seasons in your life, sit there in the background. Yes, there's a general regret of things, but it can become very pointed at times, and it really can rule how you feel, what you're going to do. It can paralyze you and numb you. And that's why if you had to work towards a definition or even start anywhere, I would start in Genesis. Now, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs. You can argue, why does God describe himself in terms of regret? That he was sorry he had made the world. He was sorry he had made man. Isn't that incredibly strong language there? Is he just explaining it in human terms? Is he just explaining it that way? That would be where people would tend to go with the explanation. I'm not going to cover that tonight. You can discuss that some other time. I just want to get to the word there. Regret has something to do with sorrow. Sorry that you've not made the right choice. Sorry that you've missed an opportunity. Sorry that you've brought something else into the life and experience of another person or a group of people. And so regret is something to do with sorrow. You can look at that reference as well in 1 Samuel 15 verse 11. And I would say that at certain times in a person's life, regret can become so strong that it can even take over a person's life. Everything they do, they see it just tinged or tainted with this regret. It's huge to them. It can stop them doing what they should be doing, and it can cause them to do things that they shouldn't be doing as they battle with this sorrow inside them. As they battle with this feeling, as they battle with the thoughts and the sorrow and the regret they have. Now, I would say you also have to realise that some regrets are just purely selfish. Why didn't I choose a different degree? I could have been on twice the salary I'm on now, some people might say. That's, in a sense, a regret that has to do with a person. I could have got on better, I could have made more money. We could call it selfish, or we could just call it self-focused. But what about regrets that really come from a genuine concern for others? I've done something, and these other people really are hurt. And they have to live with the consequences of what I did all those years ago. I would say most people's experience is somewhere between those two extremes. the self-focused, and the one who's always focusing on causing sorrow for other people. For Christians especially, regret might be very strong. Because as Christians, you ask people to look at their lives. You ask people to examine their lives. You ask people to think, what way have you lived? What way are you treating people? What way have you treated people in the past? And you think about that. And for Christians especially, they might be doing things they shouldn't be doing because of regret, or leaving things undone that they should be doing. So that's the first point. It wasn't too difficult there getting through that first one, but the bits in blue I really want you to remember. Okay, I should have said that. But the second bit is God's sovereignty and regret. Did you get that when we were reading through 1 Corinthians 15? Did you get it that Paul, when he's in the middle of describing intense fact to prove the theological point about the resurrection body of Jesus Christ and how important it is to see it in terms of fulfillment of the scriptures and the witnesses and everything, but when he refers to himself as one of the witnesses, he does this little, is it a sidetrack or what is it? It's the way he describes himself, not just as another witness, but as a witness that didn't deserve to be a witness. A witness that didn't deserve to be a witness because he had persecuted the church. He was responsible for the deaths of many Christians. And I'm just speculating, but I don't think it's wild speculation to imagine Paul meeting widows and orphans that he had made. He had made them widows and orphans through his actions. Could you imagine what he might have felt as he looked at them and as he saw the consequences of his actions years previous, 15 years previous, as he meets people around Jerusalem, as he meets people here, there and everywhere, and he had made them orphans, he had made them widows because of his action. And that's why it's so incredible to put the two verses together, because when he says, I didn't deserve to be the witness, I was born out of due time, I wasn't a natural witness here, because I persecuted the church. But look at verse 10. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace toward me was not in vain. And it is incredible how he places side by side all that he had done. And the very next phrase he mentions is the grace of God. Something has invaded that awful thing that he did. It has taken it over, and it has triumphed even over it. And what is it? It is God's grace. God's grace which has been effective in Paul. And God's grace and Paul is the outworking of God's grace, the way his life has gone since then. And that's why, though he may not have written Romans 8:28 specific argument with regret particularly in mind, but when he speaks about all things working together for the good of God's people, what's that include? Well, if it is all things, then it has to be even the things we might regret. And so when he says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, the things that he would have regretted, and the regrets themselves that a Christian might have, they're included in that all. Do you see the specific argument? He's dealing with something else actually. But this very general statement. All things work together for good. And so, I think when you try to deal with regret, you have to see regret in terms of grace and God's sovereignty and God's control. And as you move on through this point here, this doesn't mean we excuse our actions. This doesn't mean that when we do something wrong we simply say, well, I don't really need to regret it because sure, it wouldn't have worked out just as well if I hadn't done it. No, we're meant to see the shame of the things we've done wrong. Acts 2 verse 23. Peter tells the people, God, yes, was planning the delivering up of Jesus to hand him over, but you took him by your hands and you committed sin. So I'm not excusing wrongdoing. Please don't think of that. But I just want you to see the little phrase in blue. It does help you to know that even all of our mistakes are woven into God's plan. Even all of our falterings, all our failures, they are woven into his plan. And believe it or not, isn't that how Acts 2 verse 23 says? He brings about the death of his own son to fix the whole universe. He brings it about by the action of sinful people doing sinful things. One little point before we leave this, God's sovereignty and regret, is that sometimes when people look into their lives and regret things, they just keep on searching for meaning to deal with the regret. They keep on searching for meaning and saying, well, at least something good came out of it. And that's what we do with trouble as well. And sometimes we just simply shouldn't do that. Because we may never, ever, ever find something positive about the things we've done in the past, the mistakes we've made, the regrets we have. We may never find it ourselves in this scene of time. We just perhaps have to leave it until the new creation. And sometimes people think they have to find the meaning in suffering. They have to find the meaning in regret. But there's no guarantee that that will happen. The next point is the most important point, I think. Well, the next two. And so if you've laboured through those, it gets a bit lighter as we approach the end. The kingdom and regret. Another specific thing with a huge general statement Jesus makes. See, Matthew 6 is wonderful the way it's constructed. Because Matthew 6, when Jesus is preaching, where he says in verse 19, do not lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And then he says, you'll either serve God or mammon. And mammon is where we get the word amen from. It's a similar word. It's what you put your trust in. Very often it could be seen as money. And it's really interesting because it seems that verse about God and mammon, sometimes we don't link it to the verses that follow, but they are linked because there's a therefore in the next set of verses. And the way I would put it is, mammon can come to the front door of your life. It can come to the front door of your life when it's attractive to have mammon and riches and all of this. But it can also slip around the back door through worry. And that's why we have this section at the end of Matthew 6. So I'm giving you a little bit of the context of that. But in the context as Jesus deals with worry and how secretly people are still seeking mammon in their worries, what does he say about the remedy for all of these things? And he says in Matthew 6, verse 33, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." That's seeking first the kingdom. We just didn't have to go to Matthew 6, verse 33. It's everywhere. It's everywhere because that's the way Jesus preaches about himself. He is bringing a kingdom. Will people recognize him and live for him as the king? And I just simply want to get that statement that's written in blue there across to you. The kingdom must take priority over even our deepest regret. The kingdom must have priority. It must win if it's competing with regret. When you look at Matthew 25 and you look at verses 14 to 30, the parable of the talents, the sums of money given to people are simply the opportunities to seek God's kingdom first. The opportunities. And sometimes even the things that have happened in our experiences, the thing we regret, they may be the very things God gives us, the talents, the opportunities to seek his kingdom first. So that instead of being overwhelmed by regret, that when it comes to the final day, God can show us off to the world and say, look, these people lived by faith. They didn't live under the rulership of regret or something else. They lived by my standards. They lived for my kingdom. I should add in the wee bit there, 2 Corinthians 7, that in a sense you can have regret in a good way if it leads to seeing God more clearly. And you can focus on that, but I haven't focused on that this evening. And you can read 2 Corinthians 7, verses 8 to 12 about godly sorrow. The word sorrow again. And ultimately, if it leads to seeing God's forgiveness, to being able to speak about God's forgiveness even more, isn't that wonderful? And that's how it is an opportunity. But even if you don't agree with that application to regret, I just think you need to see that regret really can compete with the kingdom. But it's not only regret. I've just narrowed it down tonight, or we'll be here to midnight, thinking about all the things that will compete with the kingdom. If you try to write down tonight before you go to bed, the main things that take your energy each day, your worries, your thoughts, your plans, all of those things, what is competing in your life with the kingdom of God? We all know what it is in our own lives, and we need to sit down sometimes and think about it. But I'm just saying, when it is regret, think definitely in terms of the kingdom. And think about Paul in 2 Corinthians 10 verses 1 to 6, another specific problem, but a very generous statement. Taking every thought captive. Even the thoughts of the world, the philosophies, that sense, it is. But it's just so general, it's everything. It's a battle in life. And we must take captive the things that stand against God and his kingdom. The bit in blue, really important again. Regret may not disappear from our lives. We might just have it every day. It might be a big thing, it might be a small thing, but the kingdom should always take priority over it. The final point, turn over the page. Yes, there is more over the page. And the final point, restoration, redemption, and regret. In many cases, there can't be restoration. If a person has caused an accident on the road and it's their fault, and especially because of their selfishness, and someone is seriously injured for life, or someone dies, you can't really restore that situation. Sure you can't. You can't go back and change it. And in a sense, regret could still be there because the facts can't be changed. But it is interesting that when we read from Joel chapter 2, that God puts forth redemption and salvation of his people in terms of taking away their shame and restoring what they have lost. And so all that the locusts had eaten, the Lord would restore. I used to go to a church, and about every 2 weeks the ministry used that phrase, restore to us the years the locust has eaten. And it is an amazing thing, because you think about that. God sets forth this picture of redemption, final redemption especially, in terms of restoration. And what I would say especially is that we must let the reality of the new creation affect the way we think. And we must see all our regrets, every single one of them, in light of the day when Jesus appears. Sadly, in our evangelical world, that's not emphasized. It's not even emphasized at funerals, sadly. It's all about, yes, if we die, we're with Jesus. That's it, full stop. But it's not. That's not a full stop in the Bible. It is new creation. New creation which has already begun in the very body of Jesus. A new creation in a new world. Something marvellous. And something which brings restoration. You know something about that day? None of us who will be given new resurrection bodies will ever regret again. It will not be in our experience. We will not be able to regret. It's a wonderful picture, isn't it? That God restores in new creation. But look at this third little bullet point down. You see, as we think of that ideal, and we think of the day that Jesus appears, it doesn't mean we don't ask God now to restore as much as possible. If we've done damage by our mistakes, by our negligence, or by our deliberate intent, we ask for restoration. We ask God to restore as much as possible and help us to handle those regrets. And again, the bit in blue, you see, if our own sin has brought about regret in our life, well then remind yourself again, whilst you wait for the day of redemption, whilst you wait for Jesus to appear, remember even now that it is by his stripes we are healed. It's already begun. Restoration has already begun. It is ours. We will possess it fully. But God is restoring. The last, or the penultimate point here, I've just quoted a few of the words out of Frank Sinatra's song. I wrote it, I don't really know all those details, but I did it my way. It's sad, isn't it, when you read the words of that song? It's sad when you read the words of that song and compare it to the picture the Bible gives us of redemption even from regret. Because look at the words of this song. Regrets I've had a few, but then again too few to mention. I did what I had to do and saw it through without exemption. And then it goes on, and it really shows this man is full of pride. He's going to say the things he truly feels. He's not one who kneels. See that? And you could apply that a whole lot of ways. And one way you could apply that is, he's not going to kneel before any God. He's not going to think of his life needing redemption. He's not going to think of his life needing to fix anything that he would ever regret. Isn't it full of pride? Isn't it full of human pride? And it's the exact opposite of what God says in his redemption. We've come right to the end, and I've only just opened up this whole subject, but it's related. I think if you wanted to relate it to another feeling, it would be guilt. And sometimes you have guilt that should be there, but sometimes you have guilt that shouldn't be there as well. And you could maybe think about that at a later stage. Simply, as we try to sum it up, we need to pray to the sovereign God that we would seek his kingdom first. That his kingdom would take priority even over our regrets. And that every one of our thoughts would be under the control of the Messiah, who has died in our place, who has taken our sin, who says, you're healed already, and in me you will enjoy a creation you just won't be able to regret.